The morning fog clung stubbornly to the low hills as Clara Bell tightened the knot on her horse's reins. Cold dew beaded along the fence rails, soaking into the hem of her worn skirt. She blew into her gloved hands, scanning the line of pasture that separated her family's crumbling ranch from the government-owned land beyond. Another week, maybe two, and they would come with papers and pens, smiling faces masking the final blow, foreclosure. Clara tugged her hat low over her brow, ignoring the sting in her throat. Her father had fought to keep the Bell Ranch alive through drought, fire, and the slow decay of time, but now, after his stroke last spring, the burden had fallen to her. Clara, who knew more about bookkeeping and busted fences than any woman in this town, yet still couldn't turn back the clock on 30 years of debt. She mounted Dusty, her dependable gelding, and nudged him into a slow walk toward the north pasture. A rumor had been stirring in town, whispers about a buyer, someone new with deep pockets and a mind to scoop up struggling ranches. She didn't know if it was true, but she had no intention of handing over her family's land without a fight. The sky had just started to burn off the mist when she spotted the body. A lump sprawled along the brush line, motionless except for the slight heave of breath. Clara stiffened in the saddle, Dusty shied and stamped nervously. It took her a minute to realize it was a man, a cowboy by the look of the battered hat lying in the dirt beside him. Cautiously she dismounted and approached. His face was smeared with blood and dust, a nasty gash torn across his temple. One of his boots was missing and his shirt was ripped at the shoulder, revealing a deep, angry-looking wound. Clara crouched beside him, heart hammering. "Hey," she said, voice low but firm, "can you hear me?" The man groaned, shifting slightly. His lashes fluttered open, revealing dazed, storm-gray eyes. He tried to sit up but collapsed back with a grunt. "You're hurt bad," Clara said, glancing over her shoulder. The ranch house was a mile away, and he wouldn't survive being jolted around that long. Her jaw set. "Don't move, I'll get help." With surprising strength, his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "No hospital," he rasped. His fingers were warm, rough with calluses. Clara hesitated, instincts warring inside her. Only a fool would drag an unknown man onto her property, but there was something desperate, almost broken in his voice. She sighed. "Fine," she muttered, "but you're gonna owe me." By the time she got him to the ranch house, Clara was sweating and cursing under her breath. She half-carried, half-dragged him inside, laying him on the worn leather couch in the front room. The place smelled of old wood and liniment. Sunlight spilled through the dusty windows, illuminating the threadbare patches in the rug and the faded family photographs lining the mantel. Clara set to work cleaning his wounds, pulling out the small tin box that held her meager supply of medical gear. She stitched the gash on his head with steady hands, ignoring the way he flinched beneath her touch. "You got a name, stranger?" she asked, voice cutting through the thick silence. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Luke," he said finally, "Luke Carson." The way he hesitated made her suspicious, but she kept her thoughts to herself. She had more pressing concerns than a stranger with a battered face and secrets tucked behind his battered frame. "Well, Luke Carson," she said, tying off the last stitch. "Welcome to Bell Ranch, don't get too comfortable." He gave a low, dry chuckle that quickly turned into a coughing fit. Clara fetched him a cup of water, holding it steady as he sipped. "You live out here alone?" he asked, voice still rough. Clara bristled slightly. "Just me and my father," she said, "and he's not in any shape to help you either." Luke nodded, the shadow of something complicated passing through his eyes. Regret maybe, or weariness. Clara didn't ask. She had enough broken things to mend without picking through a stranger's past. For now, she told herself, he was just another wound that needed tending. She had no idea that he was carrying the key to her salvation, or that saving him would change everything. Luke slept through most of the afternoon, shifting fitfully as fever took hold. Clara kept watch from the kitchen table, pretending to read the ledger book spread out in front of her. Her eyes, however, drifted constantly back to the man stretched across the couch. His boots, or rather the one remaining, sat drying by the hearth. His hat had been cleaned of blood and dust, resting neatly on a nearby chair. Clara couldn't help noticing, beneath the bruises and grime, the strong line of his jaw, the stubborn crease between his brows even in sleep. Whoever he wasn't a greenhorn. His body bore the marks of hard years in the saddle. By nightfall, his fever broke. He stirred with a low groan, blinking against the dim light. Clara stood, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "You're lucky you didn't bleed out," she said, voice blunt but not unkind. "Can you sit up?" Luke managed to haul himself upright with a grimace. Sweat plastered his dark hair to his forehead, but some color had returned to his cheeks. "Where am I?" he rasped. "Bell Ranch," Clara answered. "You crossed onto my pasture half dead. I figure you owe me now." He smiled faintly, as if the weight of his injuries wasn't enough to erase a certain dry humor from him. "I guess I do." Clara poured him a bowl of stew and set it on the low table beside him. He ate with slow, careful motions, as if even the act of lifting a spoon hurt. She watched from across the room, arms crossed over her chest. "You get into a fight with a bear?" she asked after a while. Luke shook his head. "Horse threw me. Lost my gear, my footing, and my pride in about 5 seconds." She arched a brow, skeptical but not pushing. Everyone had scars and stories out here. Some were true, some were buried for good reason. "You're welcome to stay the night," she said, nodding toward the battered couch. "But come morning you'll need to move along. I've got enough trouble without harboring strangers." He didn't argue, just finished the last of the stew and leaned back, exhaustion pulling at his features. Later, as Clara banked the fire and listened to the ticking of the old clock on the mantel, she found herself studying him again. Not with suspicion, exactly. With a quiet, knowing sense that something had shifted when she pulled him out of that dirt. It wasn't just her ranch hanging by a thread anymore. There was a new variable in the equation. A man with storm-gray eyes and secrets he hadn't shared. And deep down, she knew she hadn't seen the last of him. The next morning broke cold and sharp, the kind of morning that whispered of the first frost coming soon. Clara rose early, throwing on her coat and boots before stepping outside. She fed the chickens, checked the barn, and returned to the house to find Luke awake, moving stiffly but stubbornly as he tried to lace up his battered boot. "You're in no shape to ride," she said without thinking. Luke gave a short, humorless laugh. "Don't got much choice, Miss Bell." She stiffened slightly at the use of her name. She hadn't given it to him. He must have seen the name stitched onto her jacket, or maybe spotted one of the photographs on the mantel. Still, something about the way he said it, low, respectful, eased the knot in her chest. "You got a horse stashed somewhere?" she asked. "Was riding a black mare," Luke said, frowning. "Good one, smart." Clara frowned too. If his horse had bolted, she could be anywhere by now. The land stretched wide and empty for miles. "You'll never find her on foot," she said, "not in your condition." He hesitated, jaw working as if warring with his pride. Finally, he nodded once. "Then I'll work for my keep," he said. "Couple of days, help you around here till I can ride again." Clara opened her mouth to refuse, but the words stuck. The barn roof needed patching. Fences needed mending. Winter was coming fast and she couldn't do it all alone. "Fine," she said after a beat, "but I'm not babysitting you." Luke tipped an imaginary hat, a spark of wryness in his tired gaze. "I wouldn't dream of it, ma'ams." That day marked the beginning of an uneasy partnership. Luke moved slow at first, favoring his ribs, but he worked hard. Clara kept a watchful eye, noting how he knew his way around horses, how he handled tools with the casual precision of a man who'd spent a lifetime on ranches not so different from hers. He didn't talk much, but when he did, there was a rough kindness to him that caught her off guard. He helped her haul hay into the barn, patched the worst of the holes in the roof, and even managed to coax the tractor back to life after Clara had given it up for dead. At night after supper they sat by the fire. Sometimes they talked, more often they didn't. The silence between them stretched out, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things unspoken. Clara found herself wondering about the life he wasn't mentioning, about the bruises he wore like a second skin, about the reason he didn't want to go to a hospital. One evening, after a long day fixing fence posts along the creek line, she asked the question that had been gnawing at her. "You running from something, Luke?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into the fire, face carved in shadow. "Maybe," he said finally, "or maybe I'm just trying to find something worth running toward." His words sat between them, raw and unpolished. Clara didn't press, she understood too well the difference. Still, as she banked the fire and made her way up to her room that night, she felt a chill settle into her bones. A warning, maybe, or a premonition. Luke Carson was not what he seemed. And whether she liked it or not, he was tangled up in her life now. The autumn winds grew sharper as the days slipped past. Mornings came cloaked in frost, turning the fields silver under the rising sun. Clara rose earlier than ever now, drawn by a restlessness she couldn't name. Luke settled into the rhythm of Bell Ranch like he had always belonged, though neither of them said it out loud. He fixed the sagging barn door. He coaxed an old water pump back into working order. He moved through the work with quiet determination, not asking for more than the spare room and a plate at supper. Clara didn't know when she had started trusting him, only that she had. She found herself listening for his boots on the porch, measuring the days by the sound of his laughter rising from the corral where he worked the skittish colts. It wasn't a loud laugh, more like a rumble that started low and caught you off guard. Her father noticed too. He was sharper than most gave him credit for, even after the stroke had weakened his body. "You've found a good hand," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. Clara nodded, fiddling with a loose thread on her sleeve. "He's only here till he finds his horse." Her father chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. "Sometimes, darling, folks are looking for more than what they say." She didn't know what to make of that. All she knew was that Luke made the days feel less heavy. Like maybe the walls of Bell Ranch weren't closing in as fast as she had feared. One afternoon, Clara and Luke rode out together to check the western boundary, where cattle had been pushing against the fence. They didn't talk much, letting the horses' hooves and the sigh of the wind fill the spaces between them. At the fence line, Clara dismounted to inspect a broken post. She was crouched low, hammering a new stake into the frozen ground when Luke's voice broke through. "You ever think about selling?" She looked up sharply, heart kicking hard against her ribs. "Bell Ranch isn't for sale," she said flatly. Luke's expression was unreadable under the brim of his hat. "Wasn't saying you should, just folks talk in town. Seems like you're holding a lot of weight on your own." Clara drove the hammer harder, sending a shudder through the new post. "It's not your concern," she said. Silence stretched between them, taut and humming. Finally, Luke dismounted and knelt beside her, picking up the wire without asking. His hands worked deftly, steady as he pulled the fence taut. "You're right," he said after a long moment. "It's not, but it doesn't mean I don't care." The words hit harder than she expected. She swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat, focusing on the wire twisting in her calloused hands. They finished the fence in silence, the air thick with things neither dared say. That night a storm rolled in. Thunder shook the windows, rain hammered against the tin roof. Clara lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, thoughts a tangled knot. She couldn't deny it anymore. Luke Carson wasn't just a hired hand. He was a question mark pressed against the fragile walls she had built to survive, and worse, he was becoming something she needed. When she finally drifted to sleep, it was to the sound of the storm raging outside and the uneasy knowledge that everything was about to change. The next day brought the change she had feared, though not in the way she expected. Clara had just returned from the feed store when she found a black SUV parked crookedly in front of the house. 3 men stood beside it, dressed in polished boots and clean shirts that didn't belong on ranch land. Her heart sank. "Miss Bell," the tallest one said as she approached. His smile was too white, too practiced. "Name, Frank Harlan, representing a group of investors interested in your property." "I'm not selling," she said immediately. Harlan's smile didn't falter. He pulled a sheaf of papers from a leather folder. "Understandable, but you should know, the banks accepted an offer on your debt. Foreclosure proceedings will be expedited. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer to walk away clean." Clara's mouth went dry. She gripped the feed sack tighter in her arms. "You vultures," she said, voice low and shaking. The man's smile widened. "We're businessmen, Miss Bell, nothing personal." Before she could respond, Luke stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His gaze flicked to the SUV, then to Clara, reading the situation in a glance. Everything about him shifted in that moment, his shoulders squared, his face hardened. She said she's not interested, Luke said, voice like gravel. Frank Harlan turned, sizing him up. This doesn't concern you, friend. Luke stepped closer. His presence was calm, lethal, like a coiled spring. It concerns me, he said. If you've got business, you take it through the proper channels. Otherwise, you get the hell off this land. There was a long, heavy pause. Then Harlan laughed, clapping the folder closed. You'll regret this, Miss Bell, he said lightly. Everyone does eventually. The SUV peeled away in a spray of gravel, leaving Clara standing frozen, the sack of feed slipping from her hands. Luke was beside her in a heartbeat, steadying her by the elbows. You okay? He asked. She nodded, but her stomach twisted. The reality was clear now. They weren't going to wait for the bank to finish its work. They were coming, soon. She looked up at Luke, searching his face for something solid to cling to. He met her gaze without flinching. I'm not going anywhere, he said. And for the first time in weeks, Clara let herself believe it. The days that followed felt like living with a loaded gun pointed at the back of her neck. Clara woke early, worked harder, stayed out longer, as if she could outrun the inevitable by sheer force of will. Luke didn't ask questions. He simply matched her stride for stride, fixing fence posts, shoring up the sagging porch, sanding the splintered railings of the corral until they were smooth beneath his battered hands. He worked like a man trying to build something lasting out of broken pieces. At night, the two of them sat at the kitchen table going over the ranch's finances. Luke's face was grim as he scanned the ledgers, thick fingers tracing numbers that didn't add up no matter how much hope Clara tried to will into them. You've been holding it together longer than most would have, he said quietly, pushing the books away. Clara stared down at the spread pages, a hollow ache blooming behind her ribs. She had done everything she knew how to do, it still wasn't enough. I can't lose it, she whispered. This land, it's all I have left of my mother, of my father before the stroke. Luke's gaze softened. He reached across the table, rough fingertips brushing hers in a touch so light it barely counted as one. You're not alone in this, he said. It would have been easy to pull away. Safer, but Clara didn't. She let the contact stay, feeling something unspoken settle between them, stronger than any paper contract or bank signature. Something that frightened her more than losing the ranch. A week later, Clara found Luke saddling Dusty before sunrise. Where are you going? She asked, heart thudding. He tightened the girth strap with efficient movements. There's someone I need to talk to, someone who might help. Clara stepped closer, wary. Who? Luke hesitated, then faced her squarely. You ever hear of Carson Land and Cattle? The name was familiar, a legend whispered through every town from Wyoming to New Mexico. A dynasty, richer than oil. Clara narrowed her eyes. Yeah, big-time ranchers, why? Luke let out a breath that carried the weight of a confession. Because I'm Luke Carson, Carson Land and Cattle is mine. The world tilted. Clara gripped the edge of the barn door to stay upright. You lied to me, she said, voice brittle. I never lied, Luke said, low and urgent. I just didn't tell you everything. She backed away a step, anger rising fast. You sat at my table, you worked my land, you made me believe you were one of us. I am one of you, he said fiercely, but I'm also someone who can help you save this place. Clara shook her head, the betrayal knotting tight in her chest. Why, she whispered, why would a man like you care about a broken-down ranch like mine? Luke's jaw clenched. For the first time, she saw the raw truth in his eyes, stripped of all defenses. Because I lost something once, he said, a piece of land, a family, I couldn't save them. And I swore if I ever had the chance again, I wouldn't stand by and watch someone else lose everything they loved. Clara turned away, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. I don't need your charity, she said, voice trembling. It's not charity, Luke said, stepping closer. It's partnership, it's hope. His hand hovered near hers but didn't touch, giving her the choice. After a long moment, she shook her head. I need time, she said. Luke nodded once, accepting without argument. He swung into the saddle, raincoat flapping in the early wind. I'll be back, he said. And then he was gone, a lone figure disappearing into the misty dawn. The days crawled. Clara threw herself into the work with a desperation that bordered on madness. She mended fences. She repaired the leaking barn roof again. She drove to town and back, trying to scrape together some miracle that didn't exist. The townsfolk were polite but distant. They had heard about Harlan's investors. They had heard about the bank. Their pity burned worse than any insult. One evening, returning late from a supplier who had turned her away, Clara found a black truck parked at the end of the drive. For a terrible moment, she thought it was Harlan's men again. But it was Luke, dusted with road grime, his face shadowed but resolute. He stepped forward as she climbed down from the truck. I made some calls, he said without preamble, pulled some strings. Carson Land and Cattle is making an official offer to buy your debt, every cent, on one condition. Clara's hands curled into fists. She had been braced for this, some price too high, some surrender she couldn't bear. You stay on as full partner, Luke said simply. 50-50, you run Bell Ranch, your name stays on the gate, I'm just here to help rebuild. It was too much, too good. Her body sagged against the side of the truck, all the fight bleeding out of her at once. Why would you do this? She whispered. Luke's eyes found hers, steady and full of something that stole the air from her lungs. Because some things are worth saving, he said, and you, this place, you're one of them. The wind lifted the hair from her face, the scent of rain and sage sharp in the cooling air. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. Not surrender, not charity. A hope. When she opened her eyes again, Luke was still standing there waiting, not pushing, just waiting. Slowly, she extended her hand. Luke took it in both of his, strong and sure. In that grip, Clara felt something break open inside her, something wild and scared and fiercely alive. Bell Ranch would survive. And maybe, just maybe, so would she. The first real snow fell the week the paperwork went through. Clara signed the final documents with a steady hand in the lawyer's office, Luke sitting silent and solid beside her. Outside, flakes spun through the air like confetti, blanketing the town in white. Bell Ranch was no longer a dying legacy. It was alive, tethered by new roots she hadn't dared dream about months ago. Luke never once took control. He respected her pace, her choices. Together, they set about breathing life back into the land. A new roof went up on the barn before the first deep freeze. Fresh fencing marked the north pasture, and for the first time in years, Clara bought new heifers from a rancher she trusted. They hauled them home in Luke's trailer, laughing when one particularly stubborn calf refused to budge, digging in its hooves as if it had something to prove. The house transformed slowly too. Luke repaired the wood stove that had rattled and coughed all last winter. He sanded the floorboards in the front room until they gleamed again under the soft light of the oil lamps. At night, they sat side by side on the worn couch, sipping coffee laced with whiskey, talking about plans for the spring, calving schedules, pasture rotations, maybe even a few summer cattle drives if they could find enough good help. But sometimes the talk faded and they just sat there, the warmth between them more solid than any words. Clara caught herself watching him in those quiet moments, the way he leaned back, utterly at ease in her home, like he had always belonged. And it terrified her how much she wanted to believe it. Christmas came like a whispered promise that year. Clara and her father decorated the mantel with pine boughs and old ribbons, the house smelling of fresh-cut wood and the sweet tang of cider. Luke strung lights along the front porch, cursing softly when he tangled the wires, and Clara laughed for the first time in what felt like years. A deep, bellyful sound that made Luke's head snap up, startled and smiling. On Christmas Eve, after supper, they bundled up and rode out to check the cattle one last time. The moon was huge and bright, casting the snow-dusted fields in silver. Clara pulled her coat tighter, watching her breath curl into the crisp air. "You ever think about settling down?" she asked, surprising herself. Luke shifted in the saddle, his silhouette outlined against the winter sky. "Used to think I wasn't made for it," he said. "Too much road behind me, too many mistakes." She looked over at him, heart thudding. "And now?" He turned his head, meeting her gaze fully. "Now I think maybe I was just waiting for the right place, the right person." The silence that followed wasn't awkward or heavy, it was full. Full of all the things neither of them had dared hope for when this began. Clara looked out over the fields stretching wide and wild into the night. Bell Ranch, her home, their home. She nudged Dusty forward, Luke falling into step beside her. "Guess you better stick around then," she said, voice steady. Luke's answering smile was slow, certain. "Wasn't planning on leaving." The new year dawned with a sky so clear it felt like starting over. Clara stood on the porch, coffee steaming in her hand, watching the sun climb over the hills. Behind her, she heard Luke's boots scuff the floor, the low creak of the screen door. He didn't say anything. He just stepped up beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed, close enough that she could feel the steady, solid presence of him, grounding her like deep roots. She thought of her father, sitting by the fire inside, healthy enough now to tease her about everything from her cooking to the way she blushed when Luke walked into a room. She thought of her mother's photograph above the mantel, smiling as if she knew the road Clara had traveled to get here. She thought of all the things she had nearly lost, and of all the things she had found. Luke took the mug from her hand and lifted it to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. Clara smiled, slow and real. Bell Ranch had been built on grit, blood, and stubborn hope. And it would survive now, not because of the land alone, but because of the people who fought for it, because of trust, because of a love that had grown not through grand gestures but through work, sacrifice, and the quiet power of staying. The wind tugged at the hem of her coat, sending the scent of fresh earth and pine curling around them. Clara leaned into Luke's side, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, solid and sure. Whatever storms might come, they would face them together. "Here, home,"